everyone, welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be going through my Winsor Newton gouache and finally reviewing it. This is the first time that I actually use this gouache, and so I just want to see how it compares to other artist gouache brands I've used. When it comes to professional type gouache, I've only ever used liquid text, which I wouldn't really consider gouache. It's a bit too runny to me, and Holbein gouache. The Holbein Iridori set is very similar to just the normal artist gouache, and so I tend to think of those as like the same category. I purchased a primary set of 6 as my first introduction into Winsor Newton gouache, and then I added 2 more, which are the Bengal Rose and the Naples Yellow. And I added these because they're similar to the types of colors I use in my palette normally. I want to first start off by doing a couple of swatches and just seeing how the paint tends to flow out of the tube and how easy it is to work with a brush. And so I'm going to just do a couple of swatches in the back of my sketchbook first, and then I will continue with creating an entire piece with it. I started off with the primary red, and I noticed immediately that it was pretty liquidy. It's a lot more liquidy than my Holbein gouache, but when I poured out my white, I could see that the pigment separated immediately from the binder. Like, what is going on right here? I was so worried, immediately at this step. I was like, oh, this is just gonna be like the Turner Designer Gouache again. I was so worried. And you can see that I'm trying to work that paint back into the binder, and let me tell you, it dried on the palette after a couple days, but there was a really weird shiny film to it, and so it wasn't drying as quickly as all the other globs of paint that were on my palette. All the other paints, they dried within a day. That white was still tacky for about a week. And so I don't know what happened with my white. I think it might have just gone bad after a while, even though I just bought these pretty recently. But honestly, I didn't have that issue with any more of the paints. The Naples Yellow had a little bit of binder separation at the very top, but it didn't cause any issues when I actually poured the paint out. You can also see as I'm swatching these colors, they're very vibrant, but they're also a bit translucent. They're not as opaque as I expected the gouache to be. And I kind of have to overcome that obstacle as I do my painting. I'm very much used to my Holbein, which is a lot thicker. The only way that I can describe the thickness of the Holbein gouache is like a Wendy's Frosty, I guess. It just takes a little bit more to work that gouache into something that you can use, and so something a bit more fluid is not something I am very much used to. But I found that these gouache paints are actually really good with layering. I know I said that they're a bit translucent, and so I was kind of worried about how they would react when you're trying to layer one on top of the other, but honestly, I wasn't getting any muddy colors while working on this future painting. I wasn't having any issues trying to lay down paint, except for the first layer, and so I'll talk about that now. I don't know if it was the fact that I wasn't using watercolor paper. I was using Canson mixed media paper. I don't know what was going on, but I was having such a hard time getting this first layer to happen. It was so see-through, it was streaky. Maybe it's because my water to paint ratio just wasn't right at the beginning. It was just a struggle, and I was like, I'm going to hate this painting. But I found that doing multiple layers did help with this. And so just be aware of that if you do end up using this gouache.
Yep. He just wants to sniff the flowers, Mochi.
Oh my god, look at her.
It's just another kitty cat. I don't. He's just a little guy.
Yeah.
I just had to add that bit of my cat literally having a freak out because of the neighborhood cat. But yeah, I found that just doing multiple layers really does help. It was just really hard getting that first layer down. And another thing I was having trouble with, maybe it was me just not being in the perfect paint mood, but I was having a really hard time getting the colors to match my reference. Like, obviously, the colors I'm using are like oil spill vibrant colors, like oil spill purples and greens, and that's just not indicative of what I was seeing in my reference. But I don't think that's at the fault of the gouache. I think that's just because the set I'm using is the primary set, and so all the colors are, the primaries. They don't have a lot of other colors being mixed into them. And when I look at the pigment information for these colors, primary yellow is PY138 and PY74. Primary red is PR170. Permanent green middle is PG7, PY3, and PY74. Primary blue is PB15. Ivory black is PBK9. Zinc white is PY5. Naples yellow, PBR24. PY6, and Bengal Rose is PR169. And I don't know anything about pigments. I need to actually research them to understand how they relate and how each mixture can give you something muddy if you're not too careful with it, because I have issues with muddy colors. But I mean, you don't need that knowledge to do just normal painting or anything really. That's just if you want that additional knowledge, I guess. But yeah, I know nothing about the pigments, but I was still able to make something where I wasn't getting muddy colors even when I wanted to, which was really strange for me. I was just having a hard time. I also had to rely on using the black to get darker darks, and usually with my work I rely on the blue in the palette, but this primary blue was very, very cool and light. I'm on the Winsor Newton website and they have little swatches of each of the colors, and this primary blue is almost the same as the cobalt blue to me. It is so bright and not deep at all. I'm used to using things like an indigo or a Prussian blue to make my darker colors, or I honestly prefer ultramarine just because it's more standard for me. But yeah, I had to rely heavily on the black, which I usually don't like doing. You can see it around the inner part of the train, where it touches that wall next to where the little orangey part is going off into the distance. But one thing I noticed, and maybe it's because I wasn't using too much of it, the black actually wasn't overpowering the rest of the pigments like I'm used to when I try to use black in any of my paintings. It just felt like it was making the paint a darker hue of itself. I always have the problem where if I add a bit too much black, then it just feels like I'm making shadows with black, and I don't like that. I tend to like to have a cool tone, like a purple, to use as my shadows. This is how my palette looks. You can see that the pigment is actually pretty thinned out. I'm honestly not using a lot of paint. I'm only refilling my primary blue and my Bengal rose. And also the white, obviously. But this paint seems to go a long way. I felt like I was using a decent amount to make this painting, and honestly, it was just rough getting the first layer down. Like, you can see me trying to scrub this area in right now. But when you add layer over layer, it feels like it's just popping out of the page a lot more. I made this book myself, so this is the opening part of the signature. That's why you can see that thread. But with this gouache, it doesn't like crumble or anything. I've used Himi gouache in a sketchbook like this before, and when I use Himi gouache, it doesn't like to sit anywhere near where the signature opens and like where that like thread is. Himi gouache, I've had the issue where it like crumbles around signature openings like that. I was not having that issue here, but that also could be because I'm using a wax thread this time. I guess I should also talk about what this painting is about. Obviously, it's of a train. This is based off of a picture I took in a train station while I was in Japan. I honestly don't remember where we were going on this day. It says it's to the Asakusa line, but I don't remember going to Asakusa this time. I literally have no idea where we were, and the pictures I have surrounding this like reference photo, I literally don't know where we were. I just know that we got some not so great hamburger steak that night. But yeah, back to this painting. I love painting trains, and I love the way that this gouache is layering. I don't really like using it for the initial layer. I think I might end up using my Holbein gouache just because it's a lot more opaque. I feel like I'm not fighting it as much, and again, this could just be the paper I was using was not ideal, but it layers so good. I love exactly how it layers. I wasn't having trouble layering a light color on top of a dark and having to worry about it picking up the bottom layer or getting all muddy. The paint wasn't clumpy at all, and the fact that it was pretty liquidy straight out of the tube made it super easy to do some finer details. Sometimes with the Himi gouache, when it gets like super clumpy coming out of the tube, it's hard to get it workable enough where I can do fine details with my micro brush. And so just like how it came straight out of the tube, not a lot of work, made it super nice to just do the little wires coming off of my train. I'm just doing another set of swatches at the end. I didn't really like how the first ones ended up. I don't know, I was rushing through it. And so I wanted to practice again after I had gone through the whole painting session. I kind of know how much water to paint ratio to use now. And yeah, I just wanted a reference to all the colors that I used in this painting. Technically, I didn't really use the green. I didn't like the green at all. And I think that's just because I like to mix my own greens now. And honestly, like, I prefer a dirtier, more dullish green. Like, my favorite green is sap green. It's puke color. And that just works for me. It's something where it's not just artificial to me, I guess is the best way to say it. Even though, like, you know, permanent greens and lime greens, like, those are seen in nature all the time, but they just feel too artificial to me. But these colors have such a beautiful range of hues, especially when you add white to them. And I didn't show you how they look with adding black, just because like that's not my thing. But just like the range you can get from just this small set is amazing. I really enjoyed working with these paints, and honestly, I see them like on the same level as my Holbein, just because like they work so well. Obviously they're a bit different. These are more liquidy, Holbein is a bit more thicker and a bit more opaque, but these felt honestly easier to layer and not worry about reactivating the bottom layers. There's a certain smoothness when it applies to the paper too. Like I was looking at it after I painted it, and like it didn't look like it was crumbling. I don't really know how to explain it. It's just a difference I've seen when I'm like comparing my professional gouache to my Himi gouache. I also wasn't having the issue where like some parts are matte and the other parts are more shiny. I really didn't have this problem with this paint, and that's something I do tend to see when it comes to gouache. But yeah, that is the finished spread. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to clean up my palette, but I don't want to waste all these paints that are just sitting there. So I'm taking this mini palette that I have. This has some of my like excess Holbein paint, and I'm just scooping up the white, adding it to my white pile. I'm gonna scoop up the Naples yellow, and I think the primary blue, and the rest of that Bengal rose. There was just so much here, and I just didn't want to have it go to waste. This painting took me over the course of about a week, I think, to complete, and honestly, I really enjoyed working with these paints. If you have used Winsor Newton Gouache before, please let me know in the comments. Let me know if there are any other things that I should know about with this gouache. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!